Hi everyone. So I'm joined today by Warren Ferguson, who is a qualified and regulated financial advisor, originally from Canada, but he's lived overseas now for quite some time. So Warren, welcome. Tell me a bit about your qualifications and what you've done over the years and why you're now living in Panama.
Well, I've worked in the financial services. And thanks for having me anyway. I've worked in the financial services industry since, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. I was a certified financial planner in Canada for many, many years before I became an expatriate. And at the moment, I'm Series 65 qualified in the US. I've got insurance licenses throughout Canada. And so I've almost worked with every financial product and had a significant tax business in Canada. And what I recognized as an expatriate, a lot of people needed help with their kind of cross-border financial plans that included, say, exit tax and emigration out of Canada, how they make sure they structure their portfolios moving forward properly and meet their financial goals in their new country and make sure they remain tax compliant. And so I've got a fairly extensive background that's related to business finance and feel like I'm kind of comfortable in every asset class that's out there, with qualifications. But in the end, it always comes back to what's right for the client and trying to put a plan together that works for each one of their individual circumstances. And then if there's an area I don't have an expertise in, we bring a professional in to make sure that you know that 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 we're compliant and that we take their expertise when needed.
Sure. And in addition to like the insurance licenses and other licenses you've had in Canada, you've also had experience with American expats, right? So you used to have a Series 65 as well. So I believe you've got a lot of experience with Americans as well, right?
Yes, of course, and of course, the Americans, live abroad all over the world, but they've got some very unique parts of their financial plan in that the IRS restricts them a little bit on the types of investments that they can hold. So I'm very familiar with delivering PIFIC compliant portfolios for Americans, no matter where they're going to hold their brokerage accounts abroad, and then familiar with the unique circumstances, tax loss harvesting, and some of the unique parts of an investment plan for an American and how to make sure that we strategize that properly because each country can vary. A Canadian non-resident is going to have much different issues depending on the country they live in than an American, and that American needs to stay compliant, and as well as Canada's got some unique opportunities as well to make their portfolios very tax efficient. So I kind of look at all different countries and then try and make sure that we fit the right plan, for the right goal for that individual from the country, both where they left and where they're going.
Absolutely. And as you say, each nationality has different challenges, right? So obviously Americans, unless they renounce, they still have to pay taxes to the government in all circumstances if they're earning above a certain amount of money, whereas Canadians are not always in that situation. Now, that leads me to something. When it comes to the biggest tax mistakes you've seen both Canadians and American expats make, what would you say are the main two or three that you often see time and time again?
Well, I think for Canadians, the biggest, there's a few things. Once you become a non-resident, depending on where you live, a lot of Canadians have what's called a TFSA account. Okay, and depending on the tax treaty with the country that they're in, the TFSA is not recognized outside of Canada, right? They may be able to continue with it in Canada, but at the same time, if they're in a tax treaty country, example Mexico or the United States, then they're going to pay tax on that TFSA. So does it make sense to keep that account open for that individual? Um, and and then the other side that a lot of non-resident Canadians make is that they always use you. They tend to flock to U.S. entity brokers, which will then involve withholding taxes on their interest and their dividends. And so there are a lot of, it's a big world out there, and there's a lot of opportunity, not only from an investment perspective internationally, but it's becoming familiar with some of their international options, not only investment wise, but it also can make them much more compliant and or tax beneficial when they put those portfolios together, depending on the country they live in, and then the type of investments that they're going to make. And you know, I'll even expand a little bit, a little different than your question is the world's realigning its wealth. And so I think a lot of North Americans always have that perspective. It's Canada and the US. And there's a lot of opportunities internationally now. So I really think that when you do become a global citizen, it's really important to not only look at what you know in the past, but look at what maybe some of the investment opportunities are internationally for yourself moving forward, and make good decisions, you know, that way. And I think the world is doing the same thing. You're starting to see a shift in wealth internationally. So there's opportunities throughout Asia, and you know, India and some of the what we used to call emerging markets aren't becoming quite as emerging anymore. They're becoming very, very important parts of a global economy, and I think that that makes, you know, and as international clients, you look at currency, you look at a lot of different things that people have never thought about before, you know, as they built their financial plans in their home country.
Absolutely. And what about pension assets? So I think you've helped expats look after their 401ks and also Canadian pensions. What would you say when it comes to those assets?
Well,
What do people do when it comes to their
yeah,
pension assets in North
yeah,
America?
great question. There's a lot of opportunities, both from in Canada, for example, as you become a non-resident, pension assets that move into a, you know, a locked-in account, have the ability to be unlocked after 2 years of non-residency. But at the same time, the withholding rates, depending on the country that you're in, can be very beneficial and may be much lower than what the tax rate may be moving forward in Canada. Example, you can see someone in a, you know, someone that's deceased, you can see RSP tax rates at 54%, where the withholding rate in Canada is 25%. So you want to plan those assets out. It may be very beneficial to leave them in, say, example, Canada, right? And you know, and defer the tax and let them grow there. But there's also regulatory issues with them, you know, so there's a number of concerns that you at least need to talk it out and make the best decision individually. For some individuals, it's actually to pay the tax and to move the assets, you know, out of the country, you know, and then have clearer access with no future tax liability. And so we have to weigh the pros and the cons, you know, of those pension assets. The other thing are on pension assets, there's abilities with tax, you know, with tax filings as a non-resident back in Canada with those assets each year. There's the potential that if the withholding rate is higher than what they would have paid normally, you can get a refund under Section 217 of the Income Tax Act. So it may be beneficial to file in Canada. And you never really know until you've met with a financial advisor that can take you through those steps to make sure that it could be advantageous to be able to do that. As far as Americans go, then of course they've got, you know, tons of things. Obviously, you know, a Roth IRA is not going to be recognized in Canada the same way a TFSA is not going to be recognized in, a TFSA is going to be recognized in the U.S. Americans have to make good decisions, especially if they're living abroad, to be PIFIC compliant with their portfolios and to make sure that they're not using, example, foreign mutual funds. So we take people through a lot of those, you know, decisions, and when they get to their 401ks and their IRAs, does it make sense to roll those 401ks into an IRA account, right? And then as non-residents, to make sure that that we draw that income in a preferred, you know, a preferential manner into the future. Also, if maybe that person does have those 401k assets, then what do they do if they're actually not American citizens and are actually just were there for a work contract for 5 or 10 years and now have those assets? What do they do now when they're a resident of Mexico or some other country in Latin America or Europe. How do they stay compliant, and what's their best decision? When do they take the tax, the withholding tax hit in the U.S., and what are their options with those investments to make sure they're invested and managed properly? And we have solutions for all of that, to be able to work with those individual cases. So it's different than the financial planner in your home country who understands your home country. We look at the whole picture internationally and how to put a plan in place for everyone that fits for their specific circumstances.
Absolutely. And final thing as well is structuring. So obviously, many people are interested in passing down assets to their family, or they're worried about it could be litigation or whatever it is, even divorce or whatever it is. So some people set up trusts, some people set up Panamanian foundations as well. What do you make of a lot of those structuring options? Because ultimately, my guess is if you're actually living in Panama, having a Panamanian foundation might not automatically be the best option compared to having it in another jurisdiction, right? So I guess a lot of people fall into the trap of familiarity, thinking, "Oh, I'm based in Costa Rica or Panama, so I need a Panamanian foundation." But of course, there can't be a one size fits all, surely, right?
No, absolutely. A lot of it looks at, when you review your estate plan, right? And it can fit with your wealth plan as well, depending upon your goals. I'll take clients through their insurance needs and make sure the transition of assets from a tax perspective and or that plan makes sense. And of course, a trust may very much be an important solution that can be offered, but there's costs that come with establishing a trust or a foundation. So does it make sense? Where are the assets? What jurisdictions are they in? You know, are there options to be able to use named beneficiaries depending on the size of the wealth, right? And so that may be a better solution. In the Isle of Man, you can use a named beneficiary. And so maybe that's the solution for that individual. But maybe someone does hold a significant real estate portfolio in Costa Rica. Well, then maybe a trust in Costa Rica could make some sense because, so, I mean, a lot of times people make the mistake that they think their will in Canada is going to deal with the assets legally in in Panama or in Costa Rica or in Mexico, and that's not the case. So that all needs to be reviewed, right? And as much as a financial and retirement and investment plan needs to be put in place and tax strategy, all combined together, most people should review their estate plan to make sure that that fits as well. But all of those other options with trust foundations, whatever country we need to establish that in based on circumstances that makes the most sense, certainly needs to be reviewed, and every solution will be different for every individual. And that's why they do need to speak to someone that's going to be able to help them and guide them through that.